think we're ready to get started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Karina Love. I'm the chair of the Book of the Year Committee and a librarian here. And I have the great honor of welcoming you and giving some thank yous. This is our 9th year doing Book of the Year. It's pretty amazing. And we are a presentation of the Academic Senate, and we do our event in cooperation with the SLO County Public Library, the SLO Reads program. And I want to draw your attention to our program this year because this time we decided to put the volunteers that do the work on the back. And there's about 35 names of people that it takes to put on this series of events. And they do it with grace and willingly and happily, and they're a wonderful group of people to work with. And I just want everyone to give them a round of applause. And the other thing I wanted to show you was inside the program, there's a place for you to give support for the Lax family, their foundation. And on the back, there's a place where you can give to the Book of the Year or the Friends of the Library. And so right now, I'm going to introduce Kuei Deng, who's the Director of Student Equity and Success Centers here at Cuesta, and she's going to introduce our speakers tonight.
Good evening. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce this year's Book of the Year, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This book brings to light the incredible true story of Mrs. Henrietta Lacks, one of the most important women in modern medicine. She was a poor African-American tobacco farmer who, in 1951, contracted cervical cancer. During the course of her treatment at Johns Hopkins University, her cells were taken without her permission. These cells became immortal and are one of the most influential tools in modern medicine. They were essential in the creation of the polio vaccine, proved invaluable in the area of gene mapping and cloning, and allowed for the invention of in vitro fertilization. HeLa cells, as we call them, have helped physicians save lives, thousands of lives, helped produce families, and secured billions of dollars for the medical corporations. The power of these cells cannot be measured. Maybe the most powerful aspect of this book and Henrietta's story is that it touches so many people in a personal way. From dealing with cancer to remembering the history of racism and segregation to addressing biomedical ethics and issues of informed consent, I think all who read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks are impacted deeply by the experiences of the Lacks family. I received my master's in public health, and after reading this book, I couldn't believe that in all of my education, I never learned about Henrietta Lacks and her story. How did I not know about this story? As I continue to learn more about her and read more about her, I wanted to ask more questions. The power of Henrietta Lacks' story draws us in on so many levels, and it's not just a story of the past. It is so relevant today as we continue to fight for equity in schools and higher education, things like health disparities, and advocate for social justice. One of the most important lessons I took from the book is to make sure I'm asking why. What's the backstory to what I'm learning? Why is that happening? How did things come to be? What's the missing story? What's the voice that's missing? And as we are all educators and students today, I hope tonight's Book of the Year event inspires you to continue to do the same. So now it is my honor to bring out our guests, Kim Lacks, who is the granddaughter of Henrietta Lacks, and Alfred Carter Jr., the son of Deborah Lacks, and our moderator, English professor Matthew Davis. Please join me in giving them a warm Cuesta College welcome.
Thank you, and thanks again to Kim and Alfred for joining us, and welcome once again. I thought one place that might be helpful to start is I'm curious to hear, as maybe some others are as well, what are some of your family's memories of Henrietta? What kind of stories did the family tell of her? What did you learn of her growing up, or what stories did you tell?
Well, initially growing up, our family really didn't discuss our grandmother. We knew, of course, that we had a grandmother and she died of cancer. We never knew the extent. We never knew the type of person she was. Reason being, my dad, who is David Sonny Lax, the middle son, he was only 4 years old when his mother passed. My Uncle Lawrence, who was the eldest, 17, he actually witnessed what my grandmother went through. So he just was unable to even talk about his mother. He would try, but he would break down every time because it was just so horrific in the so-called treatment that she received during that time. So growing up, we never really discussed our grandmother too much. We would hear little things about her, but as far as knowing what we know now about my grandmother, we didn't get a lot of growing up when we were younger.
Has that changed with the publication of the book and things being sort of more public and out there, that you are hearing any more stories, or is it still dribs and drabs?
Well, right now, the book coming out and the movie that's coming out Saturday. Thank you. More and more stories are coming out about Henrietta. A couple of Henrietta's cousins have been telling stories, and all we really knew as the grandchildren is that Henrietta was a loving woman. She was a kind woman. She would open her doors to nearly everyone, and she loved to cook, and she loved her red nail polish. She loved her red nail polish.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were growing up, did you first learn of the Gila cells, their existence, and what kinds of stories did the family share about their background? I'm curious to hear about when this became sort of something that you knew about and thought about and learned about.
Well, when I first learned about the Gila cell, I think I was around 12 years old, and we were at my aunt's house, and my mom, Deborah Lax, and my Uncle Lawrence Lax, and Kim's dad, Sonny Lax, they were all looking in a medical genetics book. And I saw her picture, and I thought it was so profound as a child. I really didn't know the significance of the Gila cell because, I was a child. I didn't really know. And, as I got older, I started learning more and more of the contributions that she made as far as, stem cell research and things of that nature. So as we got older, we learned more.
How about for you, Kim?
Yeah, basically the same, because my grandmother died in 1951, and her cells tissues were taken at that time. But the family had no idea that for 20 years, so many advancements in science came about because of her cells. We didn't find out, the family did not find out until the early 70s. And it was actually by accident. My Aunt Barb, my Uncle Lawrence's wife, was at a girlfriend's house, and her girlfriend's brother happened to be studying at Howard. And when he was introduced to Bobette Lax and heard the last name, he was like, well, are you related to a Henrietta Lax? And my aunt like, well, yeah, that's my mother-in-law, but she's deceased. And he's like, well, we've been discussing her in class, and her cells, and been in space, and the reason for polio, and all these advancements in science because of my grandmother's cells. And the family had no idea. So we basically found out by accident. It's not like someone actually picked up a phone and called. Now, once they found out, our family started reaching out to find out more. And then that's when, at the same time, the scientists figured that maybe they could find out more about my grandmother's cells because gene mapping had came about, stem cell. So many advancements in science were taking place, and they wanted to get more information on her cells. So they reached out to the family again and basically lied and said that they had wanted to find out if they carried the same gene that their mother carried, my aunt and my father and my uncle. And they came and took blood from the family, but that was another story that they had just told the family and never heard back from them in regards to that. So a lot of things came about by accident. But as time went on, my Aunt Deborah, who is the reason that we have the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks today, and I definitely am so proud of this movie because it isn't totally based on the book. It's based on the journey that Rebecca and my Aunt Deborah, Alfred's mom, took. Because again, if it wasn't for her having a yearning to learn about her mom, and then Rebecca having this yearning to learn about Henrietta, we would not have the immortal life. We would not have the impact that it had right now. We wouldn't know what we know about our grandmother had it not been for their journey.
And the reason why I'm so excited about the movie is because it's gratifying being able to see my grandmother on the screen, come to life, so to speak. And just because I watched the screening of the movie like 2 weeks ago. HBO came to Baltimore, and I was a consultant for the movie, and I got a chance to watch the movie, and it was real nice. It was powerful.
Do you feel like as a consultant you've had a role in shaping this story as the film is being put together and coming out?
Absolutely. HBO were very instrumental in taking our advice, adding things and deleting things. They were very sensitive to that because they wanted the movie to be as real as possible. And the director, George C. Wolfe, is a phenomenal guy. He did a great job.
No, I just said yes.
Just agreeing, yeah.
Job, yeah.
I was wondering, I had planned to talk about the movie a little bit later, but I know you're both excited about it. It's coming out April 22nd, so a week from Saturday on HBO. What are some of your hopes or aspirations for what the movie might do for Henrietta's story, for your family, maybe differently than the book, or have you thought about those kinds of things?
Oh, absolutely. I would like for the movie to shed light on Henrietta Lacks, the contributions that she made to, the medical world, and also to show the world how determined my mother was for not only to find out about her mother herself, but to let the world know who her mother was. And also I would like Johns Hopkins and the NIH and the pharmaceutical companies, I just want them to feel a little shamed. I really do.
Making them feel some shame is not a bad idea.
Yeah, because one thing I like to mention is that my Aunt Deborah, when Rebecca and her started their journey, and she was getting all this information that she didn't know about her mother as far as her contributions to science, it was really thrilling. And she was able to go to Johns Hopkins and see a vial of her mom's cell. And in her mind, she was like, this is the closest she could ever come to her mom. And one story I like to tell is that when she went to see the vial of the HeLa cell, it was cold, so she took and warmed it up as if this was her mom and she's trying to keep her warm, and she kissed the vial, and she said that you're famous, but the world doesn't know it. And this was prior to the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. So one thing that we can definitely say is now the world does know her mom, and that's just fascinating. And then with the movie, I think it's just going to make a bigger impact, and it's going to open it up to even more people.
Yeah, I think the more the word gets out,
Yes,
the better.
the better.
And both of you just sort of referenced, I think, for me, what was one of the most powerful moments in the book, and that is when Deborah sees her mother's cells for the first time. I imagine both of you have seen the cells at some point. What was that like for you? What was your reaction to seeing them maybe in person?
Yeah, that I just was in San Francisco, and the Exploratorium there has her cells. And as I mentioned, Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, they had microscope day where we were able to initially go down and see her valves, see her cells, and see how they're kept. And it's basically like a human being. They have to be stored at a certain temperature. She has to be fed. So I kind of was like, again, feeling this is my opportunity. This is the closest that I'll come to my actual grandmother. So it's very thrilling, and it's incredible to sit there and watch as her cells actually multiply. I mean, in a matter of hours. We came into the Exploratorium, we walked around and came back to the lab, and within a half an hour that it was split in two, and it had split into like 24 atoms by that time. And it's amazing that they're still multiplying as rapidly as they do.
As far as me, it was very gratifying and very touching just to be able to see my grandmother's cells under the microscope. They add like dye to them and these beautiful colors, and it's just very touching. And I know my mother would be proud right now. Yeah, she would be proud right now. Because my mother was only 2 years old when her mom passed.
Yeah, so she didn't have the chance to know with her, and I think your story, Kim, of trying to connect and warm her mother in her hands is quite telling, right?
Yes.
Quite poignant.
Yes.
So you mentioned in passing, the journey that your aunt and your mother took with Rebecca, sort of chasing down this story and composing the research. And I know that a number of other reporters and writers had reached out to the family over time to try and tell this story or a version of the story. So what was different about Rebecca that made this more possible, or that made the family more receptive to trying to share the story and hopefully get a better version of it out there?
Well, I think Rebecca came to my mother at face value. She didn't come with no hidden agendas. She was just being real. And my mother was a good judge of character. And she understood that she needed someone to be able to tell her mother's story. So I guess she put Rebecca on probation, so to speak. And and I guess she passed. The rest of the family, my uncles, they weren't, they wasn't too much in agreement with Rebecca at first, because the men in the family, they always want to be macho and rah-rah, and here's my mom, taking control of the situation, and so they told her, okay, you go ahead and you take care of her. But I really think that they wasn't expecting this to.
Do you think they underestimated
they
Rebecca?
underestimated.
Definitely.
They underestimated her, and they underestimated Rebecca, and the rapport that those two established. It was very nice. It was very nice, and as you can see, the book is an amazing book.
Yeah, I think some of my favorite passages, just because they're so vividly described, are of your mother and Rebecca traveling together. And I don't know if this makes it into the movie, but I can sort of picture like an offshoot or spinoff that's just a road movie of them taking this journey together. That could be a different kind of story. What is your relationship like with Rebecca today and the foundation that she helped to establish?
Our relationship is real well. The relationship is great. We were just together at Kim's sister house. What was that, Monday?
Yes.
Monday, and NBC interviewed us, and we had dinner and things like that. And then after we left there, Rebecca, myself, Kim's sister Jerry, and my nephew, and a couple other cousins and family members, we went to my mom. We went to the cemetery and went to my mom's headstone, and we all just, stood around and were talking. And then it started getting dark, and people started getting scared, So I played a joke on everybody. Everybody was just sitting there all somber and all calm, and the sun had went down, so it was kind of dark, and I just screamed and started running, and and they was so scared. They was like, "What's going on?" And I laughed and I said, "I'm sorry. My mother told me to do that."
She did have a sense of humor, it sounds
Absolutely.
like.
Right.
She had
Yes.
a very vivid sense of humor.
Yes, my Aunt Deborah. I like to tell the story because holidays, she would always be the first one there, the last one to leave. Anything you needed or wanted, you could call her. She would be there for you. And my two nieces, my sister Jerry's children, my Aunt Deborah was keeping them, and they had a hamster, and the hamster happened to die. And the kids came home, and they were really upset that the hamster died. So my aunt took a straw and tried to give the hamster mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She tried to bring the hamster back to life. Of course, the hamster was dead, but just for the kids to try and make them feel a little better. But she gave them had a little funeral, put the hamster in a box, and they had a little funeral and buried it out in the yard. My aunt, she definitely had a sense of humor. She was incredible. That's why I really, it's sad and it's bittersweet that she's not here physically to see all that's come about in regards to her mom's story.
Yeah, something that just struck me as you were talking is, the stories you remember of Henrietta sounded like she too was a caretaker.
Yes.
Deborah sounds very much like she was a caretaker as well. Do you take some solace in the fact that, despite many, bad things that happened or unfortunate circumstances surrounding the collection of her cells and the cultivation of them, that they're taking care of people?
Yes, and that's what I focus on. I get asked all the time, you guys were angry, and don't you think you deserve to be compensated? And yeah, initially when I first read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, I was angry. I was younger and I was angry, and I was like, how dare them take her cells and just discard our family and all the things that had taken place, and they didn't even reach out. And when they did, they knew that my grandfather didn't understand or could quite comprehend what they were trying to explain to him. So if someone would have just taken the time to say, no, this is what's going on, but they did not do that. And that would hurt. So I went through so many emotions, but at the end of the day, you look at all the positive that's come from it, all the good things, all the people's lives that her cells have touched, and that's what I focus on.
I love that this is, I think, the second time you euphemistically used the phrase reaching out the second time, because I think when we were talking earlier today, Alfred, you mentioned in passing how when Johns Hopkins finally approached the family, it wasn't really reaching out. You described it quite differently. I don't know if we could talk a little bit more about that, or I'd be curious to hear, what is the relationship like now with Hopkins? Has anything changed there?
Well, me, myself, I don't have a relationship with Johns Hopkins at all. I really don't. I mean, like Kim said, all the good that the Healer Cell is doing, I love it. You know, that's just being human. But I just don't agree with the standards and the practices of Johns Hopkins. You know, they came and they took blood from my mom and my uncles a second time. You know, they wronged them the first time when they took Henrietta cells. Then they came back years later and took blood saying it was for one thing, but it was for something else. And, you know, as far as compensation, like, that's neither here nor there. I mean, as an individual, all you have to do is have common sense. So that's not a question for me to ask or somebody to ask me. You know, all you have to do is ask yourself, should these people be compensated for what Johns Hopkins has done? And the thing is, they want to name a building after Henrietta and things like that. I mean, that's good. That's all fine and dandy, but pay me and I'll get my own building built and put a name on it.
You get the tax write-off for it too, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I think this sort of brings me into another question that I'm very interested in, which is, you know, thinking about all the issues that, you know, the experiences your family have faced, have raised, right? I think about the questions about, you know, biomedical ethics and, you know, the racial issues for sure. Class, I think, played an important role in this as well. What do you think are some of the sort of important lessons that can be taken from the experiences that your family has faced or that Henrietta herself faced?
Well, I think that we all need to understand that race played a major part in this. If she was not a black woman, I don't think this would have happened. And if it did happen, it wouldn't have been tried to be swept under the rug, so to speak, for so many years. And also with the writing of the book, I think it was race played a part in that also. Rebecca, as we all know, whoever read the book, no, she's white and she's from, you know, Portland and things like that, right? So she told the story from her perspective, you know. So if I would have wrote the story, it might have been totally different. But like my mother told Rebecca, write the story, because she felt as though Rebecca could tap into certain places and get certain information that a black person couldn't. And that's exactly what happened.
And it was more important that the story get out and the family have a say than not have it get out in some
Absolutely.
way. Yeah. Kim, what about for you? What do you think what are some of the things we can sort of take away from, you know, the experience that your family faced, and you know, what would be maybe ways that we should handle this differently, right? When it comes to things like, you know, cell culture and tissue and questions of ownership. I don't know if you've thought much about that. I know that's not your background, but I imagine being part of this family, it is something that you think about.
Yeah, because even going back to the John Moore Supreme Court case, where he basically had the same issue, except that he was not deceased, he was still alive, and he sued for ownership because they took his tissues, his cells, and created a vaccine for leukemia. And the Supreme Court voted that you cannot have ownership of your cells. Once they're taken, then it's basically like trash. And I feel as though if there is a significant role in what your tissues play in science and medicine, then you should be made aware of that. That should be something that you should have some say, some control over. And as far as the health disparities, I know I always state that one person can change things. And if you have a strong enough belief, you can go out to your communities, to your churches, the local hospitals, and try and get people, because you don't know who may feel the same way you feel about something that's sitting right next to you. And the more people that come together, the better and the changes that we may be able to make in society. It's getting better, but it's a long, long way to go. We have many issues, as mentioned in the book, that can be discussed and are still in the process of being worked on today. I know there are communities where I live where they have the elderly, have the younger kids that go with the elderly that don't have family members to go out with them to the doctors. Because a lot of the elderly that go to doctors now, they don't ask questions. They just go in there and let the doctor say, do this, do that, here's a prescription, see you next time. And we have it where a younger person goes out with that individual so that they can break it down and ask questions and then inform that elderly person as to what's taking place and do they understand and comprehend. Because a lot of times people don't. So.
Yeah, and it seems like that poor communication, that lack of comprehension is part of what was so frustrating about when Johns Hopkins did come in contact with the family a second time that Alfred was talking about earlier, was that there was that lack of communication.
Right.
I think one of the things that we talked about earlier today, there was a session that was mainly geared towards students here on campus. We talked about, the sciences and particularly like STEM fields being seen as objective and whether that was fair or not. And I think one of the things that came out of that conversation was, and that comes out of your, Henrietta's experience, is it involves people. And so what are some of the ways that, beyond what you just mentioned, which sounds like a fabulous program, to, have people help other people, put a human face on, and have advocates speak for people, what other ideas might you have for, things we could do going forward, things we can do to make it so that we don't end up with, people having their tissue taken or used without their consent or not being informed about how they're being treated?
Well, I have a nonprofit organization, and it's called the Henrietta Lacks House of Healing, and it has two parts to it. One is a transitional housing program for men coming from incarceration, and the second part is advocacy for women's health. What I do is I have seminars, I have symposiums, and we talk about women's health, cervical cancer, we talk about breast cancer, we talk about all different kinds of cancer, sort of like the forum we had this morning. And it's just awareness, because if you don't know, then you don't know. So that's what I'm doing to try to further the education and the knowledge of cancer to help people.
I think we were collecting some question cards from the audience. I don't know if those are making their way up here.
Where you can write a question. So if you have questions, take a minute and jot one down, and we'll just keep talking up here, and then once you're done, people will come down and pick them up. So do that now.
And the way I feel about what Johns Hopkins did, this is how I feel. It was like Johns Hopkins, it's like a person stealing your bike, right? A person steals your bike, and they enter races with your bike. And they're winning all these races. And they're making money. And you ask for your bike back, and they tell you, no, you can't have your bike back, but you can come see me race. And that's the way I feel about the whole taking of the cell line.
Yeah, and they get the prizes, the accolades, and so I think part of what you've been talking about what you hope the film is going to help accomplish is reclaiming some of that, the recognition, the knowledge of the very important role that your grandmother played.
Because
Right.
initially-
And I just like to thank each and every one of you people that came out, right? All of y'all that came out, because you could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here. And on behalf of myself, my cousin Kim, and the rest of the Lax family, we would like to thank y'all. Thank you.
I've run out of my questions.
And I just wanted to also state that John Hopkins, they did not even start doing symposiums or microscope day and things for the Lax family until the book, The Immortal Life, came out. Once the book was released, then I think they felt bad and wanted to try and show like, oh, we're not that bad. We're going to do something for them. But again, the family was like, it's a little too late, you know. I mean, you can do it, and it's good because they do have grants that they give to high school students in our grandmother's name to help them with their education for college if they're going into the medical field. So there are some things that they're doing, but it's still, it's never enough, and it wasn't done in good faith. Exactly.
The scales are like this. And guess which side we're on.
And I think that goes back to what you said earlier about, a little bit of shame, might not be a bad consequence from the film coming out. So I'm just going to look at some of the questions. Do you know, have there been any safeguards since the book has come out and publicity about how Henrietta's cells were gathered and used? Has anything changed for patients now? I know you mentioned the one lawsuit, Kim, that or are patients kind of out of luck, or are there anything that people can do to safeguard themselves?
Well, they can go to their local Congress and try and get a bill passed, but currently from what I was last informed of is that they feel as though your tissues, when they take a sample of your tissues for whatever purpose that you may go into that facility, it's theirs, and they can do with it what they want. And again, those are the things that we need to go out and fight for. And I'm not saying that everybody that goes into a facility, their tissues need to be identified and labeled and tagged and all, but I feel as though if they make a great enough impact on the medical field or science, then that should speak volumes. That should make people want to say, wait a minute, okay, well, this person, family should be contacted, or this person needs to be contacted, because even in our grandmother's story with the HELA, for years, they did not even know that HELA stood for Henrietta Lacks. It was out there that it stood for Helen Larson. So they did not want her identity known. And you can tell right there. And they knew, Dr. Guy and the nurses at Johns Hopkins knew who they took those cells from. But for whatever reason, they chose to keep it a secret and not inform the public as to
You know what the reason was.
So, but yeah.
So one of the questions that we received from the audience that I think I know the answer to, but might be worth hearing again, is someone wanted to know whether the families received any kind of compensation for anything developed using HeLa cells.
Absolutely not.
I mean, first and foremost, you can't even put a price value on my grandmother's contribution with her cells. It's no amount of money that anyone could give for that. But yeah, the little trinkets that they have given, it really isn't much.
So
It's
some have
for you to
tried,
speak up, yeah. But I mean, they've been, and I'm not going to sit here and say that my dad, for instance, and my uncles did not have health insurance at one point in time, and they do currently have insurance, which is great. and that is coverage for them that they didn't have, and a few medical costs, medical bills that my father had were taken care of. But again, it's still not enough. It's never going to be enough, in my opinion.
We heard a little bit, Alfred, about your foundation, and it seems clearly inspired by your grandmother's life and your mom's work. Someone wanted to know a little bit more, Kim, about what you do, and also to know whether other members of the Lax family have been inspired by your family's experiences to either study medicine or go into science, and how have you seen that shaping what they're doing?
Yes, definitely. Well, me, myself, I just got into the medical field, but I also state that had I known what I know now, I could be a professor teaching at this school. That's what I say, because when I was in science class, I really just wanted to get enough. A 70 is what we needed back then to pass. But the things that I have learned and going out, and then my grandmother's contributions, it's no telling where my life would have been had I known what I know now. And I'm always told it's never too late, so that's the reason that I am out there. But we do have younger generations that are in medical school. We have LPNs, we have registered nurses that, because of their grandmother's story and their legacy, they are in the medical field. So yes.
We'll have another generation of caretakers.
Definitely, yes. Yes. Thank you.
Someone wanted to know a little bit more about the film, which is coming out, and Alfred, you had mentioned that you feel like you got to play an active role as a consultant and work with the director. Someone asked whether or not there was something specific you could share with us about something that you feel like you changed about the film, or something that the film maybe does differently than the book that you're proud of or excited to see. You mentioned in passing with me earlier today that you like the film better than the book, which as an English professor I'm offended by.
Yeah, right?
And if Alfred had known that, maybe he wouldn't have told me that. But you're entitled to it. So
Right.
give me your sense of something from the film that you think is done better or is maybe different as a result of your participation.
Well, I think, in my opinion, the movie depicts our family much more different than the book does. The book has a lot of embellishments. It makes our family seem like we were poor. It makes our family seem uneducated, which is not it's not the case. Like my grandmother and grandfather, they may have had a 4th grade education, but trust and believe, beyond that, everybody went to school and everybody graduated. And I just didn't want the movie to portray that, because it's not true. So George Wolfe, he assured me that he wouldn't do that, and he didn't. So the movie, like I said, is going to be very powerful, and it portrays our family much more better than the movie does. And they wanted me to have a part in the movie, right? And I told him, I said, yeah, I'll take a part as long as you let me speak. So I have a small speaking part in the movie. So.
Who do you get to play?
Well, I got to play. Y'all gonna love this. On my trailer, because we did filming in Baltimore, we did filming in Atlanta. So my scene was done in Atlanta. So when I got to my trailer, and they had a piece of tape on the door, and it said "Lone Black Man." I said, that sounds like a superhero or something. But it was a nice little part. It's a scene in the movie where it's a line of African American men in Johns Hopkins, and They're all lined up to give blood to Henrietta. And I just tell the nurse that I'm there to donate blood in case she needs it. So, yeah. Very quick, don't blink. You're gonna miss me.
And I think you mentioned earlier that maybe the acting bug will bite you.
Yeah, I sat down with Oprah. I took Oprah to dinner, and I expressed to her that because there's so many people who's like, man, you a natural. You should try to pursue acting. So I sat down with Oprah and I said, well, look, you think you can get me an agent and get me some roles? So she said, Alfred, listen, acting is not for you. I said, what you mean? She said, well, I'm not saying that you can't do it. She said, but that's not your mission. She said, your mission is helping people. And I had explained to her my idea of opening the transitional houses. So she said, you can do acting for fun. She said, maybe I'll let you be on Greenleaf as a deacon or something. I said, okay, cool. She said, but I want you to stick to your mission. She said, help people. She said, open your transitional house. She said, if you do that, I'll help you. And true to her word, as she was reaching over to get some of my fish off of my plate, she told me she was going to help me, and she did that. So I really love her for that.
So is your foundation a more recent development?
Yes, my foundation started in September 2016.
And I think the connection to your family history is obvious with the women's health component of it. What about the transitional housing? What inspired you to make that part of the
Okay,
Henrietta Lacks?
by a show of hands, how many people in here read the book? Okay, so you all know I went to prison then. Okay, I went to prison myself because of bad choices and bad decisions back in 2001. And as a young man in prison, if you don't have a family network and family support, and then once you're released, it's not a good thing. Recidivism is very high in Baltimore City. And I felt like I could give back to my community and help guys just coming from prison. And that's what I did. While I was in prison, I changed the way I think, I changed the way I perceive life, and I changed the way I think about things. I love myself now, and I just want to help people, so that's what I do.
It wasn't part of our tour earlier when I picked you up from the hotel, but we drove past the California Men's Colony.
I saw it.
We did go.
Trust me, I saw
We
it.
went.
You noticed, yes.
I could spot a prison a mile away.
And Mark took us past it.
That was part of Mark's tour. Okay,
Yeah,
not
part of
Mark's
Mark's tour.
Well, one of the things I think that would be helpful, nice for you to know is that we teach a lot of classes in the prison, faculty here at Cuesta College, and that's something that I don't know. Do you have opportunities like that? I know that we talked earlier about how you had completed high school before you were incarcerated, but was it mostly personal growth there, or was it part of classes or outreach, or you said you
Well,
were
as we all know, prison doesn't rehabilitate you. You have to rehabilitate yourself. So I took numerous self-help courses. I took anger management. I took thinking for a change. I took parenting classes. I took victim awareness. And I just took a look at myself, and I had to peel back layers because we all do things. Everything we do has an underlying reason. And I had to realize the things that I was doing and the decisions that I was making, it was due to things that happened to me in my childhood. So I had to change those things, and I had to change the way I thought about those things. And when I did that, I came to the realization, and I just had an epiphany. Like, that's not me. I'm not a bad person.
You better than that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not that. I'm not that person that.
That's not what you came from.
That's not where I came from. I
Right.
came from a loving family, both sides of my family, my dad's side and my mother's side, and I just made a conscious choice to change the way I was living.
I'll let people applaud. One of the questions that I just received that I really like, because I'm in complete agreement with it, is Alfred. Someone wants to know, or they write, I loved your mother in the book. You know, just Deborah seems like a force of nature and completely unique and powerful in all kinds of interesting ways. Do you feel like she was accurately portrayed in the book? I know there were concerns with maybe other parts of the family. And since you've seen the film, how does Oprah do?
Oprah did a phenomenal job. She really did. She did a phenomenal job. I feel like she captured my mother's spirit, and it transcended to the screen. She did a great job. My mother, you're right, she was a phenomenal person with a big sense of humor, and I think you're all going to love the movie. The only thing that I really don't agree with, and we tried to tell HBO, because Oprah is talking with like a Southern accent in this movie. And
Well, that's how you get an Oscar, I think, is if you do an accent, right?
there you go. There you go. So maybe that was that was why she did it.
But your mother did not have an accent.
No, she did not have
Not
a.
that Southern drawl. But she did have a Southern drawl.
Someone else that wrote what I think I'll be interested to hear from both of you is, since you both have been doing this kind of work where you come out and represent the family for schools and other places that are talking about the book, what has been the most moving experience you've had being out and sort of representing the family? Is there one that you can remember that an audience that you had, or a question or realization that was part of your experience here that was meaningful to you?
Well, I know the one event that stands out is because it was a middle school in Palm Springs, Florida. And the Koch brothers actually started it. And it's a private school, but they provide funding for underprivileged kids who want to attend this private school. They provide them with uniforms, books, etc. Not just that, but these kids that were still in middle school, they just blew us away. They took and had each classroom and represented a factor of the book. They had, it was the Blue Cafe, and they had a group singing. It was called the Day Blues, and he was singing about his love healer. And it was amazing that these kids, and then they had another section where it was dancers, and they performed a dance, and they had created their own songs based off the characters that were in the book. And they came together and put these different plays together. Each room we went into, it was a different aspect of the book, but they interpreted their own version of it. It was incredible. And they were just middle school students. So I said, imagine when they get to be college kids. So I was very impressed with that, very impressed.
Yeah, and one of the things that we heard about earlier today was just the sheer number of people in the sciences who didn't know about Henrietta's contributions or where those cell lines came from. So if students are learning this at an earlier age, that's all for the better.
Mm-hmm.
How about for you, Alfred?
Well, for me, it's been quite a few, but the ones that stand out the most, is when myself and Kim, Rebecca Skloot, and my son and David Lax, we went to Charles R. Drew University in Compton, California, and just the warm welcome that we received, it was beautiful. And my son is 20 years old. He's in the book also. He's Alfred the Third, and we call him Trey. That's very, very tricky, right? And they admired him so much that they wanted him to come to school there.
They did.
And he, my son is 20. He was 4 years old when I left, when I was incarcerated. And, so my son grew up without his dad. So he has a lot of frustration and, pent up anger inside of him, which is quite natural. We're doing some therapy sessions now, to try to make it better. I finally got him enrolled in school in Baltimore, and once he finishes his classes, then I think he's going to transfer to Charles Drew. Yeah. So that was a good thing. And yesterday, when Kim and I were on a plane, we were sitting down, and there was a young lady like 4 rows in front of us, and she got up to let the person out to use the restroom, and she was reading the book, and I spot that book a mile away, just like the prison, I spotted a mile away. And I said, Kim, she's reading the book. She was like, oh, that's so nice. And Kim was reading the book also, and she had a bookmarker that her sister had made with Henrietta on it and things like that. So I said, let me have that. So I went up to the lady. I said, excuse me, ma'am, I seen you reading the book. I have something for you. This is a bookmarker. And she looked at me. I said, I'm Henrietta's grandson. She said, really? I said, yes, ma'am. And I went back to my seat, and when we got off the plane, her and her husband were waiting for us. Yeah. So we talked for a little while, and it was just a great experience.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
Does that happen very
Love
often
that.
where you're out in the world and
Yes.
people learn of your relation, or you see people reading the book? And...
Absolutely. When I was in, different guards would read the book, and they would see my picture in there, and they'd be like, is that you? I'd be like, yeah, that's me. I would have females, come up to me and literally in tears. It was one lady who had cervical cancer, and she was crying, and she told me, she said, your grandmother saved my life. She said, Alfred, she said, well, they call me Carter. She said, Carter, I really don't think you understand the impact that your grandmother has on the world. I said, yes, I do. I do. She said, when you get out, please don't come back. I said, oh, no. No, I'm not coming back.
Well, we're all glad you made that decision. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sure you are as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that will bring our discussion to a close this evening. After this presentation, both Kim and Alfred will be in the lobby where they'll be happy to sign books. But if you could please join me in thanking them once again for coming and talking about the book.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.